I don't know if I will ever forget the feeling of sitting in my car in that church parking lot, completely consumed with anxiety and wishing that I could just drive away and never come back. And anxiety actually might be too, and not strong enough a word to describe what I was feeling. It was more like a consuming dread. The knot that lived in my stomach all the time had grown to entangle all of me. I was doing all the things that I knew to do to try to calm down. I was taking deep breaths. I was praying through it. I had called my mom. I'd cried it out. But nothing made even the smallest dent. And I was just waiting for a routine staff parish meeting to start. But in that appointment, I never knew what exactly I was walking into. If you've been around the United Methodist Church for any length of time, you know that there are good appointments and there are not good appointments. And way at the far end of the not good appointments, there are appointments that do real damage to pastors and to churches. And that first appointment for me was that kind. There was a particular other staff parish meeting that sticks out in my mind still. We were working through how we could welcome someone who was on the sex offender registry into the worshiping community in that church. So already pretty easy agenda, no big deal, nothing to worry about. But I had gotten myself in the place where I was ready for that hard conversation. And I walked into the room, and sitting in the far corner was a parishioner that I didn't expect to see. And it turns out that she was there to read a list of anonymous complaints about me. Now, some of them were normal things that would come up at staff parish meeting, like mismatched expectations, but some of them were assaults on my character. Some of them were clearly rooted in sexism. And the one that hurt the most was finding out that a parishioner that I thought I was close to had been telling the church that I didn't go visit her when she was in the hospital. And I shared with the committee that she hadn't told anybody, including me, that she was in the hospital until the day she left. And when I said, well, can I come visit you? She said, no, I don't want any visitors, and I'm going to stay with a friend. And when I asked if I could visit her at that friend's house, she refused to give me the address. And I told the committee all of those things. And that what they said back to me was, you should have known that she meant the opposite of what she said. Right? Silly me. Didn't learn clairvoyance in seminary. But as I was crying in that meeting, someone on that committee said, you wouldn't be so upset, and we wouldn't be mad at you if you would just do what we said. By the time I left that appointment, I was so unsure of myself that I wondered if I had imagined even having a call to ministry. I had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol and with exercise. And it felt like all of the things that made me, me, had been crushed out and swept into the gutter. When I moved to my next appointment, I honestly was scared because on paper, those two churches looked a lot alike. But immediately, when I started encountering eerily similar situations in that second church, I wasn't met with anger and rejection. I was met with love and acceptance. And I knew immediately that God was using those situations to bind the wounds that I had and to start to heal me. And for a while, that was enough. But then it wasn't. And I started to realize that there was something else underneath that I needed to name, but that I didn't know if I was allowed to talk about. I needed to talk about what had happened in that first appointment, but I didn't know if I could because what I was experiencing was shame. And when I say shame, I'm talking about it the way Brene Brown talks about it, and so shout out to Tosca for being the first one to bring up Brene Brown this weekend. And the way Brene Brown talks about shame is that it's a rejection of you, of who you are. It's not about what you have done, but it is a fundamental challenging of who you are. And so because I was experiencing shame, I didn't know if I was allowed to be me. I didn't know if I was capable of being me because I had been rejected and there was nothing I could do to fix it. I think that I got into that place of shame because in our system, when appointments go bad, the fault very often gets put on pastors. Sometimes it gets put on churches, but a lot of times it gets put on pastors. If you are in the ordination process, there is pressure on you to act like everything is going great because you've got to bear fruit and you've got to act like these people super love you and are you're glad that you're their pastor even if they actually hate you. We get into a place of shame and we don't recognize that appointments are bad because talking about bad appointments isn't considered Methodist nice. And because when we do say that this appointment is bad, it questions the wisdom of our system, which we need to believe in because of the sacrifice it requires of us, but also because it is a threat to the leadership of the people who are making those decisions. And then add on top of all of those systemic things that we say that God is involved in our appointment process. And so when something starts to go bad, we end up asking really dangerous questions. Is God making me suffer in this bad appointment? Am I displeasing God? And that's why things are going this way? We end up silenced and we end up isolated in bad appointments. And all that does is serve to preserve our system. When I moved into my current appointment, which, by the way, is way at the end of good appointments, I knew that they had had a bad appointment and that the interim that came between the bad appointment and me had done some intentional work trying to help them heal. But when I stepped into that appointment, I immediately recognized the hurt that was still there because game recognized game. And I started to ask questions. I started to give space for people to talk about it the way that I had needed to talk about it. I sought out the stories, and when it was appropriate, I apologized on behalf of the role of pastor to people and sometimes to their children. I have an employee that I supervise who is my youth director, and she did give me permission to talk about this. But when she and I started working together, I noticed that sometimes I would respond to a text or an email just with a very short answer, one word like okay or sure. And when I did that, I would get a call from her where she was panicked that I was mad at her. And so after that happened, and I was confused by it, we stopped and we talked about why she was having this sort of outsized reaction to getting a short text message back from me. And what we both discovered is that in that bad appointment, whenever she got a short answer from that pastor, it meant that he was mad and that there was a lashing out or even punishment that was going to come after it. And so we've made it a habit together that when big feelings come up, when we're working together, that we stop, that we name them, talk about what the reality really is and how we're dealing with each other. And that has started to rewrite the script in how our positions work together. And it's also helped me to realize that I was still experiencing a lot of anxiety before staff parish meetings. And so I've shared that with them, and they've made sure that I know what's going on and that I'm not ever surprised walking into one of those meetings. I've realized that shame has been at work in this church too, and it was keeping them silent and keeping them feeling isolated. And it was shame because they were told that who they were as a community wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy of love and care and celebration. And the system was at work in that because they were told this should have been a good appointment, this should have worked. I've heard that pastor was sent to quote unquote rein that church in, that he was who they needed. And also, honestly, y'all, we don't name within our system when sexism and homophobia are at work, and we don't name them as sin, and we need to. The antidote to shame is connection. And so me and this church are working on that. And I see wounds being healed with them, and I feel them being healed in me. And honestly, we are doing amazing, big, gay, anti-racist ministry in the Deep South, and the Spirit is like blowing the doors off the place right now. But we should have never gotten to the place where we needed to do that work, where we needed to heal. And I think there's some things that we can start working towards in our appointive system, in our ordination system, to avoid shame. We need to allow people who are in the process of candidacy and even perhaps equip them to talk about when appointments go bad, to help them understand what's their stuff and what's not. Because that's going to help them build resiliency in ministry. It's going to help them address the actual problems in churches. We also need honesty and humility in the appointment-making process to understand when a cabinet needs to say, this was on us, we messed up. And of course, we need better mental and spiritual care for clergy and even for churches. Because when you are in a place of shame and you don't know which way is up, it's going to be someone on the outside who helps you get turned back around. If you're in a place of experiencing shame around an appointment, whether you are clergy or laity, I want you to know that you need and have permission to be honest. You need to find the safe places where you can talk about it. And that might not be the church you're in right now. You need to reclaim who you are, who God has made and called and gifted for ministry. You cannot be effective if you are living in shame. And friends, I fully believe that God wants each of us, wants you to be whole, and that the world needs you to be whole. Thank you.